Good evening. It is now 6 o'clock and welcome to the Community Development Committee meeting. I am the Chair, Louis Washington. Today's meeting is being recorded and will be available on the city's website. Thank you for joining us. Happy New Year, all. We'll start with a roll call. Councilmember Juan, looks like you're here. That's a nice cutout if you're not. I'm here. Councilmember Johnson's here. All right. City clerk is here, Dina. And Madam Mayor is here, and City Administrator, Mr. Chambliss is here. Okay, full house. Everyone accounted for. Okay, so agenda approval. We now move to our first item of regular business, which is to approve the agenda.
No
Any
objection,
questions?
no objection.
No objections? No objections. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so agenda's approved. Now we'll allow time for public comment. So at this time, we will provide time for residents to provide public comment, if there are any. Well, doesn't look like we have anyone here in the council chambers for public comment. Is there anyone online, or that's suspended right now, right? Are we still suspending online comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, do you have no public comment? Okay. It's a typo. Okay, so we will move to our next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes dated December 2nd of 2024. Any questions on the minutes? Any comments, concerns?
No objection.
No objections? Okay, so we'll approve the minutes. Okay, so agenda bills. Next on the agenda is Agenda Bill number AB 24-096, the Transportation Impact Fee Program. And at this time, we'll turn over the meeting to Director Arteche.
Thank you. Good evening, council members. Happy 2025. You may have been wondering about this particular agenda bill and associated ordinance and rate study as it made its way through to council and a second reading, but was recommended back to you at the last council meeting for some further discussion. So, and the reasoning behind that was just to provide you more transparency. If you took a look at your agenda packet, you'll see the rate study now includes a list of assumptions for comprehensive plan projects that makes it a little bit more transparent. In addition to that, we also wanted to just spend a little bit of time unpacking the credit, so to speak, credit procedures that are outlined in the draft code. So that gives the ability for an applicant that has a project that's an application that's been submitted that has an associated project on the rate study, in the rate study on one of the lists, either a comprehensive plan or one of the other ones, to go ahead and submit their a transportation impact analysis, show the number of trips that are being generated, and then get an immediate credit for a project that's already listed. So it doesn't assume that you know their impact fee would be wiped out entirely, but it gives them the ability to manage that and implement that on their own. So for those reasons, you know, we brought the agenda bill back for just a little bit more finessing, and I do have our transportation planner, Chris Braylon, online. I asked if he would provide a small, brief presentation to you, so just go over those a little bit more detail with some of his expertise. Chris, are you available?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Braylon.
All right, I'll take it away. So I'm going to share, I've gone over the presentation previously with you all. I can bring that up, but what I was planning to do would be to show really the adjustments that Director Arteche had talked about here. So bring up this. Okay, so This is the, can you all just, I want to make sure, can you see the Word file that I have here, the rate study?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So this rate study is been updated since I was last there in front of the full council. And what we wanted to do, as Director noted, was to go through a little bit more of just taking some of the project lists, which is the main list, the table one that we've been sharing with you all overall has not changed, but we did provide some additional explanation based on the feedback not only from this committee, but also from the council as a whole on a couple of items. One is just again, the Snoqualmie River Bridge project, which is a large proportion of the overall fee. We highlight again that this is a WashDOT-led project that would not proceed without funding from WashDOT, and have identified that the impact fee program includes $500,000 of impact fees of what is a much larger project, really to facilitate the design and implementation of more robust multimodal improvements along that bridge. So that's just, again, to provide some transparency as to what's going on, that the impact fee program doesn't rebuild the bridge in whole, of course. It's just there to supplement what WashDOT would normally do, which is to kind of do a replacement in kind to facilitate a more robust infrastructure. And the other piece that we wanted to highlight is this sort of batch of projects, number 12, this comprehensive plan traffic mitigation project set identified at $30 million in total, to highlight both the types of intersections that the comprehensive plan identified as having the potential to need transportation mitigation in the future. So we list explicitly all those intersections out here in this list, and then identify that there's up to $10 million of impact fee funding allocated to those, again, with the acknowledgement of the fact that some of the improvements that are needed along these facilities have regional influences, and therefore need additional funding than just what the impact fee program has. So those have always been inside of embedded into the program. We just wanted to daylight those a little bit more explicitly here in the rate study. And one thing that the director had mentioned that's important to note is that for any project that's on this list, if there's a future development that implements one of these projects in part or in whole, they're able to take an impact fee credit for that. That's explicitly stipulated in the ordinance that was read at the full council meeting. But I just wanted to explain a little bit around that. So as an example, if the Snoqualmie Mill project were to progress forward, that project has a mix of transportation improvements that are both regional in nature, so they provide benefits to the city at large. And then there's also projects that are really ultimately necessary just to facilitate access to those projects. So those regional projects that we identified in looking at the EIS document are listed out in this impact fee project list. And so they're listed here such that if the mill were to move forward and some of those projects were conditioned or agreed upon to be implemented, they would be able to get a credit. So if they were to build the Mill Street, they would be able to get a credit of impact fee dollars of up to $1.5 million if they were to implement that street in whole, meeting all the standards that the city would require for that. That's not likely to sort of take out all of the impact fees that they might be due. That all depends on the trip generation that's identified in their subsequent transportation impact analysis. But it is to say that being on this list, their mitigation, their impact fees can cover some of the mitigation that's been identified in the EIS document that they would have to implement. So it's a way to take credit for that in a very transparent way, but also to recognize that other projects will have traffic between the mill and that site, and to the degree that they're generating trips, they also could contribute to that project as well. So what we wanted to, again, main point of coming back to you all here is to provide more transparency around some of these projects, list them out, and then to acknowledge that the ordinance has a mechanism to provide an impact fee credit for when a project is conditioned to implement one of the projects on the list. Those are the main points that we wanted to cover today. Everything else, the total fee, how the fee is collected, how we calculated it, that is all unchanged, but we wanted to just provide a little bit of additional background there. So I'll pause there and see if the director has anything else to add, but also happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. If you could just stay on standby. I would add that, again, this is a new program. We have not had this program in the past. We have done other things in the past, mainly just focused in on the mixed-use final plans associated with SR1 and SR2. And really having nothing available for the rest of the city outside of that. And of course, you know, it's really timely. These, you know, master plan developments have petered out, and their development agreement, you know, at least for the one that had a development agreement, has since passed or expired. So this program is catching the leftover ramifications of, you know, what the city what the city could do, you know, without having any kind of official program in place.
Johnson, yes, sir.
Yeah, so I was a little bit confused about with regard to the Snoqualmie Mill projects. I'm glad you brought those up because that leads into exactly what I was going to ask about anyway. So because we already have a development agreement in place, I would have thought that this transportation impact fee would not apply to a project that was already approved. Is that false? Would they actually still be, let's just pretend that they didn't do any of those things for whatever reason. Would they still have to pay this fee, or having already had development agreement approved, are they exempt?
Well, feel free to jump in, Chris, but the development agreement was specifically states that they're not exempt from impact fees.
Yeah,
So
We retroactively apply to them.
and
well,
we don't, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say the development agreement has the impact fee program was built in with the development agreement for the Snoqualmie Mill in mind, because that is one of the largest sort of pieces of undeveloped part of the city, and we wanted to bring that into consideration. So they have a development agreement, but part of the development agreement states that there are known traffic mitigation or traffic impacts that would occur that were not specifically mitigated as part of the development agreement, because we don't know how the phasing will work out. We don't know the exact nature or number of trips that are generated at the phases. And so it left it open to say that development that is subsequent within those phases of development needs to conduct a future transportation impact analysis and provide adequate mitigation at the time of that development. The impact fee actually helps to streamline that process, because we've identified the main projects that are likely or would have been triggered in that instance anyway, and therefore their mitigation is just to pay the fee. There's the traffic impact analysis they do might uncover some other mitigations that are required. They're going to be much smaller in scale, most likely, and more straightforward to implement. So the main ones that were likely to be triggered have already been built in, so that we don't have to negotiate what project is it, how much do they owe. It's already baked into the fee.
Paul. Or two or three. Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around how exactly this interfaces with with the DA. So what I thought that I remembered was that in the DA, there were some specific projects that they had agreed that they would help out with as the time comes. I think one of them might have been the Fisher intersection. But anyway, that was kind of like baked in. So does this in a way replace that? Is it on top of those things? Yeah.
It's in a way, it clarifies it. What the development agreement says was that there was some known potential impacts and mitigations required. What was not exactly specified is exactly what the financial contribution was
Okay.
for the developer, because we didn't know the scale of the development at the time. This actually rectifies that. So this is effectively implementing the language of the development agreement that says thou shalt pay, X thousand dollars per trip. It covers things like the Fisher intersection. It covers things like the some of the roads that are immediately adjacent to the site. And so those don't require any additional discussion or negotiation. This basically settles what the negotiation would have been in the absence of this program.
Okay, so one more follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so then let's say that they pick from this list and let's just pretend that they say, okay, 14, 15, and 16, we're just gonna do those. So what that would do is effectively, that would essentially cover their portion of the fee. There wouldn't be some other assessment or something. It'd be, this is how you're covering your fee.
Likely, I'll let Chris explain, but we'd still want to see their transportation improvement, analysis,
Mhm.
properly, see how many trips they're generating, and then credit them back for the projects that are associated with their development. For example, 14, 15, and 16.
So
Yeah, exactly right. That so the phasing would typically be that they would do their transportation impact analysis. Through that, they determine how many trips they're generating and thus the impact fee that they would be owed, that they would owe the city. They could choose to pay that impact fee, or they could choose to implement, say, projects 14, 15, and 16, which may wipe out the majority of their impact fee payment. And because of the fact that there's already been a cost estimate prepared for these, that would count as their impact fee payment. But if their impact fee payment, let's say that they're only developing a portion and their impact fee payment amounts to $1 million, there's no reason that they would necessarily implement 14, 15, and 16. That's more than they would necessarily have to implement at that phase of the development. But they could choose to implement, say, 14 or 16, for example, and cancel their entire impact fee payment out. That's a decision that the developer would sort of make, but it would be based on what is the transportation impact fee, or excuse me, transportation impact study identify as the fee they owe, and also what are the specific issues that level of development causes, helps to make everybody understand, well, what's a logical way to mitigate for their impact.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for the 8 projects, the intersections. And I'm really trying to wrap my head around, why are they not part of the overall project list? Why are they listed out separately, those intersections?
So we worked with the Public Works Department. So we had initially identified those as 8 separate independent projects.
Mhm.
The challenge with that was that when we worked with the Public Works, they said that, well, based on the exact timing and phasing of development, it's not necessarily clear that all 8 of those projects would be triggered over time. And so we didn't want to sort of lock in that we're committing to implementing 8 projects. So the compromise was that of these 8 projects, we're expecting that future growth will demand an investment of $30 million, which in reality is less than the full implementation of all 8 of these projects as per the cost estimates. But with the recognition that we don't know where growth is exactly going to occur, we don't know the exact magnitude. So this gives flexibility to acknowledge that there might not be as much growth as the EIS for the comprehensive plan anticipated, or it might be in a slightly different location and therefore manifest itself a little bit differently. So there's some flexibility here without committing the city to invest in completing all 8 of those projects necessarily.
Okay, and just a follow-up, so that assumes that up to $10 million in transportation impact fee funding, is that spread out over all 8 projects, or is that per project?
It's spread out over all 8 projects, but it gives the city the option to invest as much of that $10 million into any of the projects the city so chooses.
Councilmember Watt?
Thank you. If I may ask a series of questions. First of all, I appreciate the clarity and also it's noted on page 21 of our packet through the introduction, the impact fee that's kind of calculated if you divide out the number of trips and all that. But my question, Chris, is this. We go down the list. For instance, the Mill Street project, and it's listed at 1.5 million. Obviously, if you're going to build a site, you have to have a main street. So the $1.5 million, and are we giving a credit back if their bill is 2 million, for instance, and they go to build this and it actually works out to be 1.2 because they've done it to the design standards of the city and met the requirements, but they were really good at cost saving. Do they get the credit for the 1.2 against what their impact fees are, or is it the 1.5 that's on this list? How does that work out?
They get the 1.5, but
They get the
they don't
1.5.
get money. They don't receive any money for it. They
Right.
just get a credit.
Right.
Yeah.
And same thing if it exceeds that and it's 1.8 million because
They pay more.
they end up paying more, or they just simply pay the cost per trip that's estimated in the
Correct.
EIS. Is that
Yeah, they don't get more credit than 1.5.
right? So it may be advantageous for them to just pay the per trip thing rather than pick the item off the list.
Could be.
Okay.
Right, but if they can do it, there's a bit of a silver lining in the city. If they can do it cheaper, then they're likely, just given the way that they can do mobilization and sort of the costs per development, they can implement things. In a lot of programs, a private developer can implement a project less than the city could do it. And then the city gets its project, the developer ends up getting some credit, and the project gets done. So it's kind of a win-win in that situation.
Thank you. That's my only question.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, going back to that list of the 8 items, I just want to kind of say back what I thought I heard you say, and then you can correct what I get wrong, just to make sure that I got this. So those 8 were pulled out because if they had been included in the list of 16 up above, giving us a total of 24 items, then all of them would be assumed as something that the city had the goal of building, which would make the fee significantly larger. And by pulling this out and saying, well, some grab bag of these things is what we want, up to around $10 million, effectively lowers the fee because the city may not actually want to implement all of these because we don't know which ones will be the most appropriate.
100% correct. And if in the future the city determines that, hey, there's growth is moving at a high clip, the fee program can always be amended to add projects in. But sort of per direction from the administration, we did not want to kind of on the first go create a fee that was untenably high. So that's how we worked the fee down in a respect. But still, it was important for us to provide you all with a lot of flexibility because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly where the development and the impacts are going to occur. So we didn't want to just somewhat arbitrarily pick, well, we think these ones are the best out of the 8. We wanted to provide the flexibility to still implement as necessary.
One more follow-up on that.
Please.
On page 30, in our packet, I guess it's maybe 10 in the document, I think you're sharing, where it has the costs or the calculation of the fee per trip. Yeah, right there. Is that 10 million included in there somewhere? Or like, is it part of the 98 million at the top under number 1?
It is the 10 million is part of the this eligible impact fee project. Well, let me take that a step back. We have to sort of pull some stuff out as part of the assumed city investment. So then we have to then split that apart. That part of that cost allocations inside the city, part of it's outside of the city. So that's where it kind of flows through all these other stages.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. I'm sorry, I don't think I got my head wrapped around that. So the 10 million is part of the assumed city investment?
The 10 million is part of the assumed city investment, yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Yes, city administrator.
Chris, don't you mean the 10 million's item 12 on the project, part of item 12 on the project list? So it's part of number 1?
You mean the thing with the 2 stars that clearly indicates that it's part of that? Thank you.
So, well, the 30 million is included in number 1.
Yeah,
Then we shave off 20 million to
correct.
say that we're not going to use the impact fee program to pay for all of that stuff. So then it slots over the 10 remaining is here, and then it runs through the rest of this mill.
There any other questions? Okay, turn it back over to you, Director Atecha. I think we're
No more comments.
okay.
Being an ordinance
Yeah.
forward to council, right? And in fact, this should be the second reading. Is that right?
The
Third.
third
reading,
Yeah, I was
okay.
gonna say, we had the second reading, the third reading, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can, for the 13th, can this be on the agenda for the 13th?
It is.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. All right, next order of business is Agenda Bill 24-130. And I'll turn it over to you, Director Techa.
Right. So the Planning Commission has been feverishly working on complying with the state of Washington's requirement to update our critical area ordinance informed by best available science. The city has been working with our senior wetland biologist, Jeff Gray from OTAC, to make these changes. And over the course of the last few months, the Planning Commission recently recommended approval and moving this agenda item on to the CD committee's plate for consideration and eventually to the city council. I do have Jeff Gray available online to give a brief presentation and walk you through the changes. If you've been following along like you have, since we did our comprehensive plan rewrite, the environmental element had a number of recommended changes and required changes from the state of Washington, including terminology like riparian management zone. Riparian management zone has a significant amount of science associated with it, enough science to help change the terminology from stream corridor to riparian management zone. So that includes a wider swath of land on either side of a stream that contributes to habitat, vegetation, and the overall watershed. So one of the major changes is an increase to the width of the previously known stream corridor. So you'll see that. These set of amendments are all inclusive, including climate change related. So you see a very minor suggested change in Title 15, including an increase to the base flood elevation. So those are mimicking, changes that are happening, across the state as well. So, and some of the changes are very, very minor, just including the right terminology and catching up with new definitions. Jeff, are you available? I think he's changing over right now, so just one second. There he is. Welcome, Jeff.
Oh. All right. Thanks, Amy. And I did prepare some slides. So I will go ahead and share that. And I'll walk through the code changes that we're looking at. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So as Emily said, the best available science review basically focused on the flood hazard regulations and the stream corridor sections of the critical areas code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize as quickly as I can the best available science kind of review that we did. There's a city code updates. There's a crosswalk that I believe was included with the packet. And then the other topic I want to address is how that might impact upcoming projects. So I will get to it, and I'm trying to keep this under 10 minutes. So if there's any questions, please ask if I gloss over anything. All right. So as Director Atechi mentioned, there's riparian management zones. It's DFW has spent several years compiling and synthesizing the science of stream corridors. The basic main functions are water quality and wildlife. Sometimes the space that streams need to maintain habitat for fish and some of those geomorphic processes. So in a review of the literature and the academic literature that's out there, they produced 2 volumes. I think they're about 1,000 pages combined. So they did a very thorough review. And what they concluded is that what we formerly called stream buffers that had development restrictions associated with them, they wanted to retitle them riparian management zones. It's a sort of a different approach to kind of stream buffers rather than just, focus on protecting streams and telling folks to stay out. It's more of kind of a proactive approach of looking for restoration opportunities along the way, in addition to increasing protections. So the way that they did that, it's called site potential tree height. And what that means is they looked at what is the tallest tree that could grow kind of based on NRCS soil types in a specific area. And if it fell and it impacted the stream, which in biology, that's a good thing to have wood and trees in streams because it creates different habitats for fish, is what's the difference or what distance is needed to protect those full set of stream functions. And so they call that the climax tree height at 200 years. And then they associated different species with it, whether it's like a Doug fir or Western hemlock. And so basing the protective zones based on the maximum site potential tree height, they come up with increased buffers of 100 to 240 feet in these riparian management zones. And the 240 feet comes from the tallest tree, which is a Douglas fir or Western hemlock. And the 100 foot is a minimum on non-fish bearing streams, but they still recommend increased protections for those streams because even if a stream does not have fish in it, it flows into a stream that eventually does. So Okay, and then the other best available science topic is floodplains and the flood hazard regulations. The flood hazard regulations are tied to FEMA's flood insurance rate maps and the boundaries of the 100-year floodplain, which occupies most of the city. The Department of Ecology is encouraging local governments to go beyond the FEMA minimum requirements. And one of the statistics for backing that up is that 40% of national flood insurance program claims from 2017 to 2019 were for properties outside of these mapped flood zones. And so they suggested increasing protections because the FEMA maps are increasingly unreliable in this changing climate. We've kind of seen that in the news quite frequently. In addition, it's also the federal policy to go above and beyond these minimum FEMA requirements. So, so what does this mean for the city code updates? So we replaced stream buffers with riparian management zone. It's a little less intuitive, but it's more comprehensive from a science perspective. And what does that mean to the stream buffer or the riparian management zone widths in the city? Non-fish habitat streams previously were 25 or 50 feet wide. Protective zones will be increased to 100 feet. Fish habitat streams, they're called type F, will increase from 75 feet to 200 feet. 200 feet was kind of a compromise and sort of an average of the different tree heights based on the mapper that DFW prepared for these code updates. And then shoreline streams have no change because we cross-reference the shoreline management plan. So that way there's not a conflict between the critical areas code and the SMP. Let's see. For floodplain regulations, the current code requires 1 foot of freeboard. Freeboard is defined as the base floor elevation above the base flood elevation. And so if the 100-year flood elevation, say, is 200 feet, then the finished floor elevation has to be 201. That's what the code is now. And we're going to increase that to 2 feet, to adding an additional
Just
foot.
one moment.
Yes.
Sorry, sir. Sorry to interrupt. Just one moment. We do have a question from Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thanks for this information. I do have a question regarding the base flood elevation. So are you stating that this is based on information in Snoqualmie, or you're stating it's an average for the state?
It's not an average for the state or based on specific information for the city of Snoqualmie. It's basically policy trends across Washington, and even at the federal level, is to increase this protection from 1 to 2 feet. I think King County actually has 3 feet, which is one of the most protective in the whole country, from what I've heard.
Is this a choice, or is this, are we
Yes.
supposed to, it is a choice?
Yes.
Okay. I would recommend that we don't do the 2 foot,
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, you recommend,
that we do not do the 2 foot.
okay.
And in fact, we're actually going to be working on a Lomar map, right? Lomar or Lee map?
Yeah,
Lomar.
yeah, a letter of map revision, which also supports the 2 foot. We could talk more about it, though.
We should support the 1 foot because we have less flooding, and we had the conversation earlier. You would see a reduction in flooding based on the different changes that has happened, right?
True.
Positive.
Some of the science that was looked at was considering other things like climate change and what climate change could do to communities like ours. So,
Right, we've been making changes according to that. And I think that may have concerns regarding that, and I also have concerns that we're increasing our flood area going outside the FEMA map. I mean, that's a huge impact as well. I think that'll impact a lot of our residents' flood insurance. So,
That's a good distinction. So we're not increasing the spatial, the horizontal mapping. It's just the, oops, excuse me, it's just the vertical for any development within the floodplain. So it's more of a design standard change rather than a spatial extent, a mapping extent.
We have an additional question from Councilmember Watt.
Well, I will echo the mayor's concerns, because part of the reason why we have mitigated the flooding in downtown Snoqualmie, which has been historically more susceptible, but there's been a change in the flow over Snoqualmie Falls, which has reduced the risk. And much of our downtown is in, flood zone, floodway.
We,
And raising it from 1 foot to 2 feet may be a knee-jerk reaction. I'm gonna get in trouble for using the word knee-jerk. But I'm concerned. I'd like for us to take a deeper look at, because there's been mitigation. Are we that susceptible, even given the climate change that is occurring in other communities that are perhaps downstream from our situation?
Councilmember Johnson?
A couple of thoughts. I think where I first go to is my understanding is that these changes, most of them, apart from things that are like changes in definitions that are practically required, it sounds like, but in terms of the numbers, is that these are intended to be based on the best available science. So I do not have the requisite degrees to decide between 1 foot and 2 feet. If the best available science, according to experts that we have available to us, is 2 feet, then I'm inclined to believe them. If I'm misunderstanding that and that these two numbers here are coming from something else that isn't necessarily tied to best available science, then that's a different argument. So that's one part of it. And then the second part is, I suppose, kind of like a two-parter in itself. Would buildings be grandfathered in such that if they're at 1 foot right now, are they going to have to go out and get some massive crane that's going to lift their house up so they can put another foot in? Or is this for new construction that would be happening mostly in the downtown area? In which case, I'm not sure how 2 feet would be that big of a difference for them building a new building versus 1 foot. Like, what would be the extra burden of that? So I'd realize that there was a lot kind of packed in there. So maybe we like start at the top and work our way down. Am I understanding the best available science part? And then we'll kind of build off of there.
So, yes, it is based on best available science, and it's just the the recent climate change trends. Even for our region, there's increased precipitation, duration, and frequency, which is why some we're drying up later in the year per se. So there are trends, and that's based on science. The floodplain regulations are tied to the FEMA and the flood insurance rate mapping. So we're not changing the 100-year flood elevation. We're changing the level of safety of a building that would be developed within the floodplain. So and to that regard, there isn't like existing buildings, would be grandfathered in, so this would pertain to new development. And so say if you have a finished floor, it would be 2 feet instead of just 1 foot. So it's the livable space that you walk on for a storefront or for a home. And currently, right now, they do that because say the finished floor elevation is here. What they do is the crawl space beneath that structure has to be vented to allow the flood waters to flow through. So all it is adding one more additional protection to that actual structure.
We have an additional question from City Administrator Chambliss.
Well, I just
Right.
wanted to expand on,
Oh.
so you're in a building that complies with the 1 feet, so imagine it a foot taller. And the high school also is a good example of one that complies, so the entire high school would be a foot taller. That does associate with additional cost, but one of the other problems that you have is you have a height limit. So now you're compressing the size of your buildings even more unless you're gonna adjust that height limit
We would
to make up the difference.
potentially have to address the height.
I would just
Okay.
add one more comment. No, we would not force people to raise their properties up 2 feet. A lot of people voluntarily come to the city and ask for their existing single-family residences to be raised, and we are working with folks to do that with grant money. But no, you're not required to.
So anyone who's currently at the 1 foot would be grandfathered in to the
Mhm.
1 foot minimum. And it'd just be future construction for the 2 feet. Right,
Correct.
okay. Councilmember Watton.
Thank you. The concern too is that the difference between a 1 foot elevation and 2 feet is going to be in the cost of doing the project. It may exclude some projects going forward just because of the additional costs. It will definitely raise up occupancy costs because they're directly associated with it. And I think thirdly is, I think we need to go forward in a measured, careful way, because what applies to one community isn't something that's universal to all communities. You know, even though that there's best science out there saying overall global warming is causing rivers to be higher and such, but I think that we need to be very careful in understanding that before moving forward and making drastic changes that is going to absolutely drive up costs to developers. It will close down potential projects, including projects that we're already working on currently on Railroad Avenue and over at the mill site. So I think we need a measured approach to this. I think it's good that we're addressing it. But I guess the other thing too is this: what are the consequences? And this, we need to know, what are the consequences if we do not change? What's the downside to this, to the city, as well as balancing it with our desire to continue to grow so that we have the tax dollar base so that we can fund the basic services everybody wishes to have.
Yeah, I'll just. Come right back to you, Councilmember Johnson. Yeah, no, I can't agree with you more, Councilmember Watton. With that said, though, I don't like to make decisions in a box. My thought would be, what are other communities doing with a river that's, close by, that's comparable and in size? Are we seeing other communities drastically move to this 2 feet, or do you have any data on that?
We do. I don't have it in front of me and I don't want to misspeak, but we do have a survey or catalog of what other cities and counties are doing across the state. There are a number of cities that have already adopted this 2 feet standard above the 1 foot, but we can provide that information.
I think that would lend some context to this decision. Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that'd be very helpful to see, are we going above and beyond here with the 2 feet? Yeah, exactly. What's kind of the standard that people are going with now? But I also just thinking of my position on a city council as a city council member, kind of reflecting on, let's say that there's a flood in a few years and we had the opportunity to go with the 2 feet and someone comes back and say, well, that's what the best available science is. But the council was more worried about the cost of construction, so they went with 1 foot. Now I start getting worried about that sort of thing, if that makes sense. Yeah, definitely some context of what are other cities doing, and then maybe it does sound like we need just a little bit more of a justification for the 2. It sounds like that's what I'm hearing. So we just want a little bit more justification for why 2 instead of 1, because I don't know about anyone else on the council, but I certainly don't have a deep background in hydrology, et cetera.
Yeah, we can provide that
But just
information.
something.
Yeah, we can provide you more information, maybe bring this back, at the next committee meeting. We even have, new information from the Federal Risk Management Standards, the FFRMS, that's moving forward with this adoption of a 2 foot. But we can compile all that and bring it back to you.
That'd be helpful. Sure.
Specifically around, like I said, similar or comparable communities with the size of their river and proximity, what decisions they're making around that 2 feet. City Administrator Chambliss?
I would also suggest that the LOMAR is a critical piece of information before you make this decision. Because it could be that the LOMAR is going to lower it 3 feet and then go into 2 feet is a much easier decision. So I would encourage you to get our science that we need, our local science that has not been done, and get that LOMAR before you make such a decision.
Yes, Councilmember Johnson.
On the timing, is that okay for us to wait for, or is that gonna take too long? Do we need to act on this?
Well, it looks
Before we
like
get that.
we're not gonna have a first reading, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I saw in the packet, till January 27th, I think is when we were predicting to have the first reading.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves us another
We,
committee.
we won't have a letter of map revision done, before the first reading, but we could come back with some more informed
Yeah.
science to
So
help,
we have some
to help you gauge
Okay.
better.
I just wanna make sure we have time to do
Yeah.
that.
The letter of map revision is really to get that credit for the weir that was installed, and that will benefit people that are paying flood insurance rates in the downtown area. It'll support the city's movement to a class 4 community rating system classification, and then ultimately lower the insurance rates. So there's a credit there. But there's also a component of climate change that reverts back to the best available science.
Councilmember One?
Thank you. 2 points, if I may. First of all, and that is comparable cities that have close proximity within 2 miles of a waterfall. And secondly, building height is actually in the municipal code on line 529, that the buildings that are elevated, the height shall be measured from the BFE, not sure what that is, but plus any required freeboard
The base
Base
elevation.
elevation.
Yeah.
base, plus the required freeboard, which we're talking about is 1 foot right now. So it's from that 1 foot up. And so if it's a 35-foot, then it stays 35. It just, everything will go up.
Some cities
an
measure
extra foot or
their
whatever.
height off the base, the average finished grade, and that would not be our case.
Okay,
That's what it is right now, though, right?
right.
Right.
Right, yeah, so it wouldn't change the height or restrict it another foot by going up a foot, just for clarification.
You would have to change that. So I'm not sure when we updated, probably 2018, we did a study of why isn't there any building in downtown? The last one was like 2000. And we determined just some of the restrictions that we had was too restrictive on building.
Mhm.
And they had to deal with the floods, and then also the height. And so the 35-foot, you're limiting it to, I think, just a 2-story. And I think the way it was written, because it's on the base, and then you have the base flood elevation, right, it's just from the base. And so really you're only getting like a 34-foot story, that's not a story, but height in building. And it really limited some of the projects that we were going to have, including one that was supposed to be built on the corner, so.
And that was in 2020, to the mayor's point. Yeah.
So recently. Councilmember One?
So may I make this recommendation that we come back in a month and review this? We shouldn't be in any hurry, and that'll give staff a chance to address the concerns and bring it back to committee rather than go to council.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are your thoughts, Director Artecha?
That sounds like a great idea. Would you like to hear the rest of this presentation at the next committee meeting, or just hold off on all of it for 1 month?
We're
I
at the
think
end.
I concur. Just 1 second. We're gonna, a second question here. Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm trying to remember if we actually saw it or not, maybe it's coming up, but table 19.12.160. Have we gotten to that part yet? That's the one that's the class 1 streams, class 2, class 3, class 4.
We haven't gotten there, no.
Okay, well then I'll hold off on it. Maybe we just save that.
So
for
I,
next
I,
one.
I think with the time constraint here, with our next committee,
Yeah.
we do pause here. Great discussion. We pause here. We continue the presentation on the 20th. And, you know, we, hopefully will see more data before we send it to council.
No, and maybe it's the 21st then.
Oh, sorry. Oh, we have a holiday on the 20th. So the 21st, excuse me. Okay.
And there was previous information that that we prepared for the planning commission that had summarized some of the King County hydrological studies based on lowering the waterfall. So we can provide that information too. I think there was a study that the flood elevation did reduce by about 1.5 feet, but it hasn't been reflected by FEMA in the flood maps. So that's that additional level of security that people are referencing. So we can provide that information as well.
Thank you. Okay. Is that a game plan?
Yep.
Sounds good. Okay, there being no further business to come before this committee, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned at 6:56 PM.